Hey guys, so you're probably wondering right now why you just watched a very long tutorial on surfaces when maybe you feel like it has nothing to do with the exercise at hand. And so I just wanted to show you maybe one of the many different ways in which you could potentially use some of the information from that previous tutorial as you begin to build, in a sense, what is a type of complex surface or networked surface. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to essentially show you the steps that I would use to build the beginnings of a mask and how I could then sort of create a base template of that mask here, and then maybe take some of the information gleaned from that base object to create a series of line templates for our wireframe structures that we'll be making. Okay, so in order to do that, what the process that I'm going to do is I will draw a plan of that mask, and I've actually, in fact, already drawn it, so it'll just pop up here in a second. Then I will draw a longitudinal section, so basically the profile view of that mask to give it some dimension along the vertical axis, and then a series of transfer sections on this side over here to sort of give it a little bit more fuller form, okay? And then from there, I'll show you how you can extract information and how you can begin to see what your object would look like. So I've gone ahead and have things here in my layers, and those are labeled so you can turn them on and off. You will also notice that it's actually this surface types is the same file for everything. So if I click this on and I zoom out, you can see all of the surfaces and the ways that I changed them and affected them from before. So, but I'm going to go ahead and keep that turned off. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn on the line work. Okay. So this is the plan or the basic outline of my mask. I made a grid for myself, as you guys can see in all of these cases. The grid is 16 inches by 8 inches. It just a quick random set of information. I could have made it taller. I wanted to exaggerate the figure, but you know, I would hope that you guys would spend a bit more time designing and thinking about the overall size of your object before you begin. This is just kind of a quick exercise. And so you can see here, I've drawn my outline. My outline, if I explode this, you'll see that it's actually made up of a series of curves, and all of those curves, if I grab all of this whole set together, you'll see that that set is just then mirrored along this axis. So if I just show you, it's mirrored along this axis, okay? And I did that on purpose. So in fact, I just actually drew those 3 lines, 4 lines, right? And I'll just recreate it for you right now. And I grabbed them all and I mirrored them in order to make sure that my object was perfectly, or my mask was perfectly symmetrical, right? So that was the outline. That's in fact, you know, from top view, the plan view. And once I had that information, I knew that at the center of this axis here, if I tried to look at it in profile, I would essentially be creating a longitudinal section, right? And so I knew that in this particular mask, that meant that exactly at that axis, the mask would hit exactly this point and this point here, right? Because it was mirrored. And so essentially I knew I extended lines from there, from my plan over to my longitudinal section area. So you can see this line and this line. And I created a new base, which is this line here. So in a sense, this line that I'm just drawing right here delineates the back or the end of my mask. And then in a somewhat similar fashion as this set of lines here, I drew out of a series of lines, and I'll try to recreate that for part of it here, but essentially I used the spline command, right? The curve command to create the curves, right? And so you could see I made it out of composite. So that was my first one. My second one was somewhere along here, and I don't remember exactly, but you can sort of see where kind of a line, not quite. So maybe it was more like something like here, here. Anyways, you can see here, right? If I actually click on it, we would see exactly where I was putting all those points. But you can see I sort of started creating that line and thinking of that profile, thinking of how I would match it, this being kind of an extended, maybe top, sort of regal top, the forehead, the beginnings of the nose, and then the mouth, right? If I actually hide the grid, you can see that that profile is what I ended up coming up with, okay? You can also see that I have sort of subdivided this profile, this set of lines, or this plan, right, into a series of equally spaced contours, right? And so you can already begin to see how I could have done that, right? So for example, I'll do it again. I can actually just delete all these. I can grab them all, delete. And again, I would type contour, and I start of this, and I started here, and I went in that direction every inch, I believe. Right? So in this case, because I only had the outlines and not the surface, it just gave me the points. I could, of course, just then draw lines at every interval, right? Or I could have, before that, taken this, turned it into a planar surface, looking at it with my shaded view, and then actually with this thing, made my contours, right? And then contours of a surface would give me lines, right? So here I see it again, and there we go, right? So those are those lines. And you can see that those lines match those lines over here, right, of my profile view. Okay, so that was the first step. Then I could actually now imagine that I could take this, copy it, move it over along that axis, right? Right to that intersection where it sits. And then if I go to perspective view, I could begin to imagine how I could rotate this 3D. And rotate it 90 degrees vertically. And now we sort of have that relationship of that outline of the plan, of the overall outline of the object, with that outline of the profile at the center, right? So once I did those two things, I then actually went and took information from both of these sets of lines. So now I can actually, if I hide this, I could see I also extracted or took the information of the length of the lines, same location as over here, right? But of how tall they were essentially in my profile view. And so then what I did, for example, you can see here is to create this, in this case now, transverse sections, or sort of views as they went sort of as sections across the mask in this direction. What I did was I copied this line, I believe it's this one, over. So I can copy it, and in this case, I'm just going to move it to the exact same location, right? And then I grab that exact same line, the location, that one, but here, right? And I copied this one to the center of that other line. And I'm going to hide this for just 1 second. Hide this for a second, and you can see that those two lines are one on top of the other. Then I grabbed that line, the shorter one of the profile, and I rotated that line 90 degrees. And so now if I draw my transverse, or it's essentially the section of the profile of the line that goes from here to here, and I make sure that that line touches at this point, and then back at that point, I will know that it will intersect, or it will match up with my profile of the plan and my profile of my longitudinal section. And so that's why when you look at it here, you see that I made this curve, right? And I did that for a couple of them, 1, 2, and 3. And so if you can see now, I could actually grab this thing, copy it over exactly at that endpoint, and copy it to that exact location. And you can see that it matches perfectly with this edge and perfectly with that one. And I can rotate it 3D along this axis, once again 90 degrees. And you can see now that we're starting to create sort of that network surface that is kind of the information, the ISO curves in a way of this mask, of the surface that makes up this mask. And of course, the more of these that we draw ourselves, the more we have control of the exact topology, we could call it, of the mask, right? So of course, it would get very complex if we did a whole million of them, but you'll even see that even just with these 5 curves, we really begin to define what the overall shape of this mask will be. I did that incorrectly, placed that in the wrong place, so I'm going to copy over, paste it again. You can see it should match up perfectly right there. I can rotate 3D. And there we go. We begin to see how we could imagine how those could be the wireframes. We could actually build these profiles out of our metal gauge wire, right? And we could then also like imagine how that would begin to define the overall form of our mask, right? So, and the more, of course, than we did, like I mentioned before, the higher fidelity or more accuracy that we'd be able to produce and to control, right? And so I just want to show you what that now begins to produce. And in order to do that, you know, we can imagine now that we need to create a network surface or a edge surface, or really, right? Remember that last one, that is sort of an in between those two, a patch surface, right? And again, the patch is not exactly the most accurate of surfaces, but for our intents and purposes, will give us a good preview of what our mask would begin to look like if we actually took these outlines, right, in our essentially our transverse, our longitudinals, and coupled with the outline of our plan, what it would begin to look like as a mask, right?